So I'm Stephen May. I'm from a company called HR Bear Recruitment, and we're delighted to be here. It's the first time we've been at the expo. And I said to the marketing team, listen, we're going to go along to the expo, and I volunteered to do a presentation, which sent everybody into a tailspin and said, well, what are we going to do? And we wanted to bring to you something that was different, that wasn't about some theoretical model or some stuff we may have read before, but would bring you some data. And you'll see as we talk through some of the things we've done, we have in the last few years placed up to 10,000 workers into the contact center industry. So that's a lot of people. And so we decided, listen, that's an engaged population. Let's send a survey out to them. And we sent a survey out to just over 4,000. And the data that came back was incredibly interesting. And it's in a white paper. I'm just going to share a sample of it with you, just a taster. But there's a lot more information in there. So if any of this catches your attention, feel free then to log on and get the full white paper of the survey that we sent out. So let me get into the content. We were really interested. We said, if we've got all these workers in the contact center industry, both permanent and temporary, what is it that makes them choose one over the other? What is it that makes them stay? And we started to draw some conclusions that it was about how well engaged they were. And actually the data started to show us that as well. So it's not just this word that we will often see in relation to engagement. There's some subjective words in there. There are some sort of qualitative words, but actually we said the data is starting to indicate to us with the meta-analysis that we support that word engagement is really key. But what we need to do is quantify that in terms of which we can measure it. So we said, before we built our survey, let's actually correlate our survey output and the way we structure it to some well-known data banks around engagement. So the first one we looked at was Gallup Q12. People know Gallup in the Q12? Most employee surveys, satisfaction surveys, are kind of built around the Q12 questions. 12 core questions that Gallup have proven without doubt that if you can get positive indicators against those, then it will have a positive impact on organizational performance. Okay, it's without doubt a link. Gallup is a research-based organization, so there's core 12 questions. And this is why we got drawn to it. I mean, this is some pretty compelling data here. And I'm drawn to the fact that they've spoken to 1.8 million employees across all of those different industries. And one of them is our call and contact center industry. So if you go into the meta-analysis on the Gallup website, you'll see drill down into our own industry. And it's very telling around the things that make a difference to people that work in contact centers. And so we sort of looked at that and we said, well, what are their questions? And how do we structure our survey that kind of links to that? So that then there's some credibility to the story we're telling around engagement. And what Gallup showed through their questionnaire was the meta-analysis against the 1.8 million employees shows an impact on the metrics that are up on this screen. Now, this is just a selection. The customer metrics stood out for me. This is why we're here today, around customer loyalty and customer satisfaction. But things like profitability or productivity, turnover in terms of business, but also turnover in terms of staff and staff churn, the impact on absenteeism and quality of work. So those are some of the key metrics that they looked at. And from the data, remember, big meta-analysis, you can have a look at it. These were the sorts of numbers that were coming out. They were proving, without doubt, that those organizations with a higher Q12 score, higher engagement against those 12 questions asked against 1.8 million employees, that those organizations that scored higher outperformed other organizations that scored lower by this data. 10% improvement around customer loyalty and engagement metrics. There'll be a whole range of those that are in there. 59% better around employee churn, better at retaining people in their organization. A 41% improvement around absenteeism. So for me, very compelling data that we said, listen, if Gallup have spoken to all those people and they're showing that those questions deliver through their meta-analysis, again, it's not theoretical, it's proven on the data, that this can impact on organizations. I said to the marketing team, let's use that as base one. That should be base one when we start to go out to our 4,000 contact center people and say, answer these questions. We also said, you know what, we should probably have a second database that we look at. So we went and looked at some research, scientific research from a guy called Dan Pink. Anybody seen Dan Pink? I urge you, when you finish it, to go onto YouTube and look at Dan Pink, and there's a clip there that says, "What truly motivates us?" The surprising truth about what truly motivates us. It's a 10-minute clip, and he does it with animation as he's talking. It's really quite compelling. But what Dan Pink decided to do in his research is he wanted to challenge this theory that said, actually, the carrot and stick approach doesn't work. I thought this was interesting in the industry that we're in. What he was trying to prove was actually that higher incentives do not lead to better performance, right? Higher rewards do not lead to better performance. And what he showed through his research and the studies he did, the complete opposite, that higher rewards led to poorer performance. Really interesting insight. And so he structured his research kind of linking to some of that Gallup stuff. So initially they did research at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, so a pretty well-recognized organization. And then they went out to India, excuse my pronunciation, but a town in India called Madurai. And essentially they got different groups of people to do tasks, and they were rewarding them. And they were saying to people, if you perform at this level, then we'll give you more money. And what they found was exactly what they suspected, that paying people more money to do some of these tasks didn't actually make them perform. It made them perform worse. And I thought, oh, that's interesting when we take that back to Gallup and we think about organizations and what we do to get the best from people in our work environment. And often, I think Dan Pink jokes, he said, for those of you that think this is a socialist conspiracy, actually, it was financed by the Federal Reserve Bank. So I thought that was really interesting. But what Dan Pink said is there are 3 core areas. And he talks about these: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So keep those in your head, because this is what starts to lead us into our survey and the data you can access in the white paper. His scientific research that he did showed that those organizations that don't focus on autonomy, mastery, and purpose, and I'll explain those in a minute, have negative impact as shown on that screen. Lower performance, short-term thinking, unethical behavior, things that aren't right. And it's really spooky when you then overlay that onto what Gallup is saying. So there's this inextricable link between these 2 sets of data. There's the meta-analysis, 1.8 million employees. And of course, there is the stuff from the scientific research by Dan Pink. So we looked at both and we said, let's start to think about our own data fields and how we structure that. And so to the data, here's our contact center worker survey and the stuff I'd like to share with you. I think I already said to you, 10,000 contact center workers placed in the last few years. We went out to 4,500 and we aligned it to Q12 and we aligned it to Dan Pink. And it was all around that theme of, hey folks, why do you get drawn to and why do you stay and what makes you leave? So that was the kind of basis of it. And so as a summary, our data correlation is this: Gallup Q12, meta-analysis, overlaid with Dan Pink and his scientific research, which then drove us to our contact survey, and our data that we're going to send to you in the white paper was structured in this way. So 33 questions we asked, and we structured them into 6 core sections. There's some stuff at the beginning around demographics, I think it's really interesting to share with you, and some generic work information. And then in the meat in the middle, we looked at autonomy, mastery, and purpose, those core areas I've just talked to you about. And at the end, we asked some interesting questions around attraction and recruitment. Now, I'm not going to share all the data with you, and I don't have all the answers, but when I looked at it with the team, it raised lots of questions. And I think that's what I'd like to share that data. I wonder what that means. And some of you, I have no doubt, will be having some great practices in your call and contact centers. And for others, it might be a reflection that thinks maybe we could do things differently. Our question bank clusters are like this. So autonomy. Autonomy is about the freedom to be self-directed. And this is what Dan Pink was saying, and that's what some of the Q12 data says, that how can you give people a sense of, I have some freedom around how I decide what I do. And we looked at this particularly in relation to hybrid working. So there's some great data on that. Those are the sorts of question banks that we were looking at around autonomy. And you can see a lot there around, have you got the tools and how you're trusted, particularly in the concept of hybrid working and remote working. But we also balanced that to say, actually, People are working from home a lot. Does that mean quality goes down? So we asked questions around first-time call resolution. What's more important, AHT or quality of the call? And there were some interesting stats that came back from that. Good data. I think it gives us a lot of pride around how people are connected to what we do. The mastery section was this, people want to get better at stuff and people want to feel developed. Now, people have been saying that a long time for, I guess, new generations coming into the workforce, but it's never been more important. And I think even for me, being a baby boomer, it's still important to me about how I'm going to grow each year in my current role. So we ask questions around what is it the organizations you work for are doing for you in terms of mastery and training and development. And then the last piece was purpose. How well connected are you to the vision of what your organization is about? And are you excited to be there? Or do you just feel like you're doing a transactional role? Because what Dan Ping said is, actually, people need to be connected to an overarching goal of the business that they work in if you're going to get the best from them. Okay? So summary before I go into our findings and share with you some of the data. We looked at Gallup Q12, we looked at the meta-analysis, we looked at Dan Ping's clusters, and we shaped our survey around that. So I'll share some things with you. So who did we speak to? I pulled this out. I thought this was interesting. Just a sample of the data. So this stood out to me. Now I know it'll be different in different sectors, but I was taken by the fact that only 19% of the people we spoke to were in the age bracket of 50 and above. Why is that, I wonder? And I'm sure there'll be lots of reasons. Maybe it's the avoidance of technology. Maybe it's about how we attract. But balance that against this stat from the ONS. The employment rate for people from 50 to 64 is now 71%. There's a population out there, but they're not being drawn to work in our contact centers. And I wonder why, and it's continuing to increase. And then there's another interesting stat that's come from the Associated for Retired People who are saying still people in that age bracket are sensing that there is a certain degree of discrimination against older workers. Now, how that manifests itself, I don't know, we didn't ask, but they feel they're not drawn to it. And you'll see later on around flexibility, we've got some great feedback from workers in younger age groups saying, I'm getting the flexibility I want, it fits my life. But this population is saying, it's not flexible enough for me. So are we building flexible work patterns and job crafting to fit maybe one demographic? I don't know, but it's certainly something to think about if we're going to be drawn to that population of workers. The other area I wanted to probe around was the talent that we've got in contact centers. So we looked at kind of qualifications. And of those that we spoke to, 50% of them were either educated to degree level or masters and above. And of those, 46% actually had another full-time professional career. Now, I guess some of those could obviously be people that may work, I don't know, in medicine, and they're always going to go into that, or law, and they're always go into that. But what I thought was interesting is of that population, only 25% stay working in contact centers. Where do they go? So I'm now thinking about the 50 plus talent pool. I'm now thinking about this group of people who are very bright, who are exiting the industry. And then I balance this against this data. And this is from the Manpower Group's annual talent shortage report for this year. I know we all talk about there is a talent shortage, but the data speaks for itself. Year on year, we have a 77% shortage of talent, yet we've got the 50 plus, and yet we've got these professional people exiting. Now, I don't know if there's a correlation, what's going on, but it's making me think differently about how we support organizations like yourselves around attraction and retention of that staff. And drill that further down. The talent shortage across the industries, 79% in communication services. So that includes us, right? So that's the highest area that impacted. Yet there are two bits of data telling us from our people that we spoke to, actually, one, I'm not drawn if I'm over the age of 50, and two, I'm very well qualified, but I decide not to stay. Don't know what that means. And you'll see in the report when essentially there's some further drill down questions where you could possibly draw your own conclusions. We also said to them, how satisfied are you in what you do, and how much do you enjoy your work, and how stressful is it? So here's some interesting data I wanted to bring across. So only 28% said they were very satisfied. Now, I don't think we should beat ourselves up, because below that was, how are you satisfied? It's quite, very satisfied is an optimum degree of motivation, but still only 28% saying they were very satisfied. But what really stood out to me was we asked them, how stressful is your role? Do it on a scale 0 to 10 for us. High degree, 74% were saying it was 5 and above. And more importantly, it was 46% of people said 7 and over. I started to wonder, has that got something to do with the fact that people don't stay in work? I don't know. Has that got something to do with the way people are hybrid working? I don't know, but you'll see some data later around hybrid working that maybe there's a link to this. But this is really telling for us, okay, around people costs. Look at this data from the CIPD. 2 to 16% of our annual salary costs are being spent on absence at the moment. Now that data, mapped with what we're seeing here, made me think, how do we look about making perhaps that work environment a little bit stressful that helps with that retention question? And so it leads into then saying, if this is what people are telling us generically about their work, how does that filter into autonomy, mastery, and purpose? And some of the questions around that. So autonomy, that heading, self-direction is best. We asked lots of questions, but we particularly probed around the whole idea of remote working, because that's giving you some autonomy. I can work for my employer, but as it fits around my life, fills the big autonomy piece, right? I think these stats are pretty standard. If you look outside in any other surveys, we know there's a high degree of people now that want to work hybrid and remote, and indeed, people are. And it's incredible that our industry has enabled that to happen. You know, way before COVID, back in the days when I was working in customer service outsourcing with a company called Ventura, we could never have perceived that we would have people in our industry working from home, but it works, right? There may be some interesting implications around that. I then started to think about, if they're all working from home, I wonder if that has an impact on quality and what they believe. So it's important. So we asked some questions around first-time call resolution, and actually, is it right to deal with a customer instead of the call time? And look how high those scores were. So we had people saying, yeah, I still work from home and I might be remote, but I passionately am connected to the importance of quality of service. I think credit to all of you that may be involved in that people scoring that so high. People will say workers away from the office, they get disengaged and their value starts to drop. Well, this telling was not in the scores. They're really powerful. And then I thought I'd be a bit cheeky and I thought, is that because they believe in it? Or is that because they're being watched? I don't know. We didn't have the answers to that, but you know, you people will know this better than I do in the different businesses that you work in. Employee monitoring software is on the increase. Now, I thought that could either be driving high performance because people are being watched, or does it link to some of the stress findings that we said before? I'm a football fan and I go to the football games, and I remember listening to two guys next to me who said, I work for 2 contact centers and I have a jiggle mouse or a jiggle mat. Do you know what those are? It's a thing that moves that you put your mouse on. So when they're not there, it looks as though they're working. Never heard of it before, jiggle mat. So I looked at it and said, well, I wonder what's happening with remote working. Is this making people comply to perform well because they have to, or is it because they believe in it? Or more importantly, what's the impact on stress? Autonomy as well is about the freedom to make decisions. And I was really encouraged to see that people feel that they're allowed to make decisions and they're trusted to make decisions outside of a core process. That's a big change for me when I worked in contact centers where the call scripting was very, very prescriptive around what you had to do. People feel that you're giving them the tools, so the technology is really important to them. But only a third felt their opinions counted. And this is critical of what Dan Pink says and Gallup say around autonomy, is I have a say in things. So maybe a reflection for us all potentially around how do we engage with employees, how do we connect to find out what their views are, particularly when they're more remote. And so to summarize on autonomy, again, there's a lot more sections in there. Those businesses that best deliver autonomy, Gallup will tell you this, Dan Pink science tells you this, are good at these things. You delegate decision-making, flexibility in the workplace. Job crafting is about adapting the job in a way that I think might make it better for me and also the organization. Overall, high level, this is what the survey was telling us. Big, strong ticks means really positive. So across all the question banks, we're getting really good feedback saying, I am trusted, decision-making is delegated, and I feel a real strength of flexibility. Job crafting was fairly neutral. There's not strong one way or the other. But what did come out as people wanting more was more open communication and respecting individuality. And again, you can drill down into what the questions were when you get the white paper. So some interesting stuff on autonomy. Mastery. I just want to get better at things. Okay, that's what Dan Pink says. That's what the research says. And it also says it in the Q12 questions. There are 3 around help me grow is one of the areas of Q12. So I pulled out some data here. Really strong scores. 80% are saying, I want assurance that you're going to invest and develop in me. I think we know that. That's not a surprise. 79% said, yeah, and I get it. So well done. I think that's a great pat on the back for the industry. And 64% are happy with the personal support they're getting from their line manager. Also, I think quite powerful when you think 60-odd% are working from home. So to keep that kind of development focus and the line manager support with a remote workforce, I think was really powerful. But this was interesting. 1 in 2, not really impressed with their induction. And there's still a third of those people who are saying, I don't get the opportunity for promotion. So I started to think about that in terms of the older workforce. I was starting to think about it in terms of some of those people that come in with their degrees and thinking, how are we taking a more holistic approach with our succession plan and the development of our people to help them grow? And what is it that's happening in induction that's making people think it's not so effective? And there's some data you look at in the report, and I'll share a bit later as well, where actually people feel there's a disconnect of the psychological contract. So what they're told and what they're sold to what they turn up to, there's a disconnect. I think that was interesting around what do we do that's slightly different. And we have a big part to play, I think, in the recruitment world to make sure when we work with candidates, when we work with yourselves, that we are clear with people around our expectations for the role. Balance that. This was from the HR Director newsletter. Some interesting data that I tried to correlate. I think we know the Great Resignation. The phrase has been around for a long time. Turnover, 20%, 26%, so far higher than anywhere else in our industry. And again, an interesting number, up to £20,000 for each member that leaves within the first 12 weeks. That number against 1 in 2 saying, I didn't think my induction was great. I think have a look at your own data and see how many people perhaps churn out the industry, maybe in that first 3 months of them joining the industry. So on Mastery, I also went back to the HR newsletter and they'd done a survey and they said, look, these are the big questions we get from candidates when they want to come into any work environment. And I thought they were useful to look at in relation to us in our contact center industry. So to summarize on Mastery, the research and the data is showing that those businesses that best deliver against Mastery do those. You use data for rapid feedback, good performance data, management data, lots of feedback and recognition, lots of opportunity for development. And at the end, you create a psychological safety. When I come in, I feel as though the psychological contract has continued and I'm clear on what you want me to do. I wonder if those last 2 have something to do with that induction number. Don't know, can draw some comparisons. And overall, and you'll see in the report, and you send for it, is big strong ticks on the first 3, but not so great on the last 2. I'm already in my head drawing conclusions here around what that means for induction. And last but not least, purpose. The desire to do things in service, something that's large in ourselves. I come to work for something else. This is great data, by the way, and so I'm going to quick through and just give us all a pat on the back. Lots of people feel connected. They understand what we're about. I looked at ESG. I think you've all got ESG strategies and build for that. Driving it in your strategy. I'm sure this is a big enabler to why people feel this way. People are choosing organizations because of their approach to ESG. So I carry those stats forward and I'll go into purpose. Look at the one at the end. Promoting ESG internally and externally is a key driver to purpose. And our survey said big strong ticks across all of them. Wow, that was really interesting. So there's obviously a lot of focus going into that. So Mastery, purpose, and autonomy, those 3 key areas. So a lot of data in the report to share. I want to finish off on attraction and recruitment. Just a couple of stats for you I think were interesting. Look, all those people saying the reputation and values of the contact center is important. ESG, interesting. Only 1 in 2 saying pay is very, very important. Think about that. And finding a job. 61% saying they get it through job boards and agencies. Great. Well, I thought these are interesting. only 15% are from a friend referral and 10% through the contact center company website. Food for thought around how we do things. Still lots influenced by flexibility. And finally, around application, in finding it straightforward, I think as the technology helps, 77% are saying, I find it helpful speaking to a person. So think about that in terms of AI in your sourcing process. So to the end and to my conclusion and summary, lots of data. I wanted to share this with you. We looked at Gallup, and Gallup are telling us organizations that perform better against Q12 will increase customer loyalty and engagement by 10%. They're saying your productivity will improve by 17%. Turnover will decrease by 59%, and absenteeism will perform better against other organizations. So the data's there if you get people engaged. Dan Pink is saying the science shows we want to be self-directed, we care deeply about developing, and purpose is really important to us. And therefore, to our survey, as a final summary against the questions we asked, lots of great positive scores, but the items in black are the takeaways. Ask in your contact center, are you helping people feel their opinion counts? What are you doing with your induction to make it effective? How do you get everybody to feel there's an opportunity for promotion? And for me, the big ticket item, in a world of talent scarcity, how are we focusing on diversity inclusion of that age group, 50 plus, showing that we value people and results by looking at well-being and stress. Remember, 74% of people are scoring really high around the stress piece. So it was a quick whistle-stop tour. It's a lot of data. I think it's fascinating, and I'm more than happy to share it. It's a lot of people that have given us some feedback from that sector.